Hi, today I'm talking with Angie Doyle. We talked about her work on the board of directors of the Agile Alliance, how she's not afraid of asking hard questions, and the influence that being blamed for a bad system had on her leadership style. I'm Yves from Who's Agile. My pronouns are he and him. Welcome to my channel. You see a lot of Agilists around me on this screen. If you want to hear me interviewing, please click that subscribe button because these are the people that I've invited so far. If you think I'm missing people, let me know in the comments. And that like button, well, if you liked today's interview, don't forget to click it.
Hello everyone. With me I have Angie Doyle. Welcome.
Hi, thank you.
And welcome, I want to show people a little bit on where we are. And I'm in Belgium. And Angie, when I originally met, you were actually living, or at least you were originally from Johannesburg. So let's move this a little bit to what Johannesburg would mean. But from what I understand, these days you're actually no longer living in Johannesburg, but you moved to Hilversum, to the Netherlands. Is that correct?
That's right. That's correct. So I've been
So
here a year, almost a year and 2 weeks.
And so if I zoom out a little bit, we moved a little bit to the different. Hello, is Google want to help me out? But actually, Hilversum is not that far from where I am. Unfortunately, it seemed that Google doesn't like me to zoom out that much. But okay, it's not that important.
Whereabouts in Belgium are you based?
I'm based in Ghent, so that's
Okay.
yeah. Well, depending on how you look, between Bruges and Brussels, somewhere, and that's actually what I tried to show, but it looks like
Yeah.
Google is a little bit slower for. Okay, that doesn't matter. Let's bring you back on screen.
Cool.
Let's hide this. Let's hide Google Earth there. Um, Okay, I've jumped already a little bit in your story, but for the few people that don't know you in the Agile community, let's tell us a little bit. Who is Angie? Who are
Okay.
you?
So, as you mentioned, Angie Doyle. I am an enterprise agile coach, originally from South Africa, born and raised in South Africa, lived there for most of my life. And about a year and a bit ago, I moved to just outside of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. I'm a mother of 2 children, and I've got 3 dogs and a cat. Yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Thank you for sharing. Because indeed, it's a little bit, and at the same time, I've learned already. We learned already a little bit about the personal and the professional life. Hilversum in Belgium, actually, we know that as yeah, as where there is a lot of broadcasting and a lot of
Yes, it's
television
the
and whatever
media
from
hub. That's
it's a
true.
media hub. That's the word I was looking for. So that part I know, but it's actually interesting because I know the name, and in my head I kind of know it's close to Amsterdam. But if you would have asked me to put it on the map, I would not been able to put it near Amsterdam because it that much geography
Yeah,
is again not known.
it's not as well
So
known as Amsterdam. It's about a 20-minute drive outside of Amsterdam. So
but interesting enough, it's a name that even in Belgium we know as the media hub. So even there we know it a little bit because in well, if I look back when I was young in the 80s, we were actually watching a lot of Dutch television because back then we had like what was it, two possibilities in Belgium to watch, at least on the Dutch side, maybe two on the French side, but the Dutch television was much more interesting. So the little television I watched, I probably watched more the Netherlands and the Hilversum things. Anyway, that brings us back, or brought me back to my youth. So let's jump right into these questions. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
I think most people who know me know quite a lot about my background. I'm quite open and transparent about it. I think I'll share a bit, maybe a bit of a quirky story that I think has been quite instrumental in my thinking as I've grown up. So it actually goes back to my first job I ever had. So I started working at the age of 17. We didn't really have the financial means to go to university straight after school. So my goal was to work for a bit, save up some money, and study university part-time, which I landed up doing. But I started working when I was 17 as a credit controller. So very different to the kind of work I do now. A really great learning experience. And I used to work on, one of the old green screen terminals. So I used to capture invoices, and then overnight the batch would update, and, the whole, really, really old systems, because I'm talking very long ago. And the interesting situation that happened was I was capturing something in the system one day, and at the time my manager was removing dormant entities, and I happened to capture something against an entity that she had deleted. But back in those days, everything ran in batches overnight, so I didn't know that it had been deleted. Anyway, because of how the batch ran overnight, the system crashed. And when I came into work the next morning, it was down for a couple of hours. We had to call the engineers in from our head office. And I was called into the office and essentially given a warning, because I had created a crash of the systems because of this thing that I'd done, where I'd captured something against an entity that no longer existed. And, at the ripe old age of 17, I was still trying to figure out, but how would I have known this if this only updates overnight? And it was really instrumental in my career, actually, because it taught me a lot about leadership and the kind of leader I wanted to be in the future. I mean, I was very aware of how that made me feel, like I said, the ripe old age of 17, kind of getting blamed for the system, crashing. And it also ignited a passion around, software and how it works. And it actually led to me moving into process engineering, which is really what I consider to be my first career. So yeah, it was instrumental in really, forming a lot of how I think about things, and getting really interested in how people work, how our systems kind of created to enable that work, and really making things that, systems that are easy for people to use, that don't make them feel like idiots when they use it and when they do something wrong. So yeah.
It's really interesting, because at so many level things went wrong in that story. You've been blamed for something you could not have known. Your manager, or at least the person, well, the system should not have crashed. That's one other thing. The system should not have crashed, because if that's the job from your manager to remove these things, eventually it will happen, and it probably happened a lot more. So there's a lot there that you could. If we would do a 5 whys or whatever, anything about root cause, we will discover so much things that was considered normal probably at that time in software, and in how we treated people, because even these days we sometimes see these kind of things. But yeah, I think today we no longer consider them normal. Even in some companies it might still happen. So it's interesting that you learned that right out of school, basically at 17. It's
and it formed that passion that I have now, right? I mean, it was instrumental in determining my career. I had a very profound sense of justice after that, and what was fair and what wasn't fair. And that's kind of persisted as well as I've grown older. So while it's like a silly story, it was really instrumental in the whole course of my career. I could have gone a very, very different route, but this kind of put me on the course where I am now. So I'm grateful for it. I wasn't grateful at the time, but I'm grateful in hindsight. So
and I can imagine that you could also react it differently. I can imagine that you could have been feeling very grumpy and bad about that manager or whatever, and
I'm
just
sure I was at the time.
yeah, and I'm sure about that. But it could have blocked you from going where you are now, where somehow after that emotion got away, you still looked at the lessons. What could I learn? Maybe not the lesson that manager wanted you to learn, because you basically learned at the deeper level. But you still learned. So that's really nice that you were able to do that and overcome that, because for many people, when things like that happen, especially at the age of 17, it's really hard. I have 2 children now, a little bit older, while I have one 18-year-old and one 20-year-old. So I know how they sometimes react to some of the things, and I can imagine that at that age, it really feels, really bad if a
Mm.
manager starts to blame you for things
Yeah,
that,
it triggered a lot of rebellion in me for rules and bureaucracy, and yes, that still there, that little bit of rebellion against the system. But yes, yeah, it was a good. In hindsight, it was a good learning opportunity for me, I suppose. So,
yeah, and you used it in a good way, I think,
mm,
because you learned from it. So that's really interesting. So
yeah.
thanks for sharing, because that's indeed one of the things I'm looking for, because that's, and it's not something we typically share. We
Mm,
sometimes forget these kind of lessons, and maybe you tell it to your partner, and sometimes to your friend or
mm,
whatever who was there at the time, but we sometimes forget to tell it to each other, how
yeah.
important that is for our career. So
Mm,
thank you very much for sharing. And it
pleasure.
kind of brings me to that second question, like, if you would not have been doing what you've been doing now, do you have any idea what could have become of you? Were there that path destined
Mm.
to for you to go?
So I think, certainly I never wanted to be a credit controller. That was just your like any first job, right? I think it was just a learning. I was always quite interested in law, and actually, when I did start studying, which I did do from
Mhm.
18, I started studying part time, well, in the evenings and working during the day. And one of the subjects that I
Wow.
really loved was law. And I was very interested at the time more in commercial law. And whenever I say to my husband, what is the career that I should have done? He always says, you absolutely should have been a lawyer. But I think it's because he thinks I argue really well and I always have my facts and I'm very, I do the research. But jokes aside, I think I would have loved that as a profession. I still get quite fascinated by law, and if there's like quite high profile cases, I'm very interested in the sequence that it goes through. So I think some areas of law are very exciting. So that could have been an option, I suppose. It certainly was at one point. I looked a little bit into what would it take to really specialize in law, but by the time I got there, I was already so involved in more how businesses run and that process engineering side, because that was a big part of my early career, was around process engineering. And that certainly, when I weighed up the two, I went the business route instead. So,
And if you look, because when I hear law and commercial law and business, I'm also thinking about contract and stuff like that. Is that something that you read all the small little letters of all the contracts? Is that something that
I
interests you,
think I
or?
used to. I think I used to really love getting into the details around that and making sure that I understood. I'm probably not as diligent now as I used to be. Contract law, I'm not sure if that would have been the area I would have focused on. That's a level of detail, yeah, that I think would have been challenging for me to stay engaged with for long
Hmm.
periods of time. Certainly more maybe on the criminal side would have been a little bit maybe more interesting. Yeah.
I'm asking because I sometimes see people when I'm working with people, or for example, in one of the collaborations I'm doing now,
Mhm.
I read the contract multiple times in detail, asked a lot of questions, and my partner in there was like, "Wow, I've never had somebody reading all
Mhm.
these details and looking at some of the words." And what happened was that. Well, part of that contract was basically a collaborate, basically two kind of contracts put together, and because
Yeah.
of that, some of the things were kind of contradicting each other,
Contradictory. Yeah.
and that was in that document for probably more than 5 years, and nobody had ever noticed it
Yeah,
until
I've done that. I've picked up an error in a contract, so maybe it is similar. Yes, I have picked up errors in contracts
Mm.
before. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
Mm,
hearing. We had, yeah. You look like someone who would indeed read it, try to find it, and I
mm,
can understand that this is not something that is that's interesting to do in a day-to-day job
mm,
every day. But for the contracts that you sign, you would read it
mm.
enough to make sure that
I know what I'm
everything is.
signing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Which is normal, of course.
Mm,
But these days, especially with how is it, all the apps that we're downloading, and you get all the details that you have to. Do you accept? Yes, yes. I've
oh
accepted
yeah.
300 pages that are that I skipped through it. No, but yeah, for a lot of other contracts, I think we should learn it much more and have it much more. So thanks for sharing, because that's indeed something that not always people might see in you, that you've been through that path. So it's a very interesting thing to know.
Mm.
Let's move to that third question. What do you consider your biggest challenge, or at least the challenge that you want to share?
Um, I was asking my husband last night, like, what he thinks my biggest challenge is, and he joked with me. He was like, "Is it learning Dutch?" And I was like, "Yes, it's learning Dutch." So learning a new language at my age is hard, but I think you were looking for a little bit more of depth on that one.
Well, it can be part. It can be. It's well. Let's turn it a little bit around. Is learning a part, because then you look just at the language, but is learning something that is hard for you? Because it seems to me that you're.
A language is hard. I think as you get older, learning a language is quite challenging. And, specifically for me, coming from South Africa, we taught Afrikaans, especially at the time when I was going to school. Afrikaans was the language we were taught in school. And it was only much later that other languages like Zulu were introduced. So Afrikaans is very similar to Dutch, but it's different enough to make it really hard to learn Dutch. So I often mispronounce words. And when we speak, our kids will always say, you're speaking Afrikaans, you're not speaking Dutch. And we're like, it's so confusing. And when people speak to us, we convert Dutch to Afrikaans to English. So it is, it's a very strange learning experience for us. But certainly it's not the biggest challenge. It's quite fun for us, if I'm honest.
But I understand. I understand the similarity kind of problem. I had a lot of German when I was in school, and it's so in some language, some words are so similar, but actually mean something else, that it's actually very confusing.
Yeah.
And Afrikaans, I have the sometimes when I hear it, it's like I think I understand it, and then when I actually talk to the people, it's like, oh, okay, I totally did not understand it. It's There are some roots that because for historical reasons the language is imported in South Africa, so there is that part, but that doesn't mean that the words still mean the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think getting back to like the challenge, because Dutch was maybe a little bit in jest, although it is a challenge. But I think something that does challenge me, or that I'm often challenged with, is saying no to things I'm really interested in, things I'm passionate about, things when I'm going to learn something new. And I joke, but it's a problem. I mean, as an agile coach, what I tend to do is, because I don't say no often enough, I do have a very big backlog and a very long list of things in progress. So at the same time, while it's challenging for me to say no, I also have been able to experience a lot of things as a result of not always saying no. So I've got to meet a lot of really interesting people. My husband often complains because I'll be doing something on a weekend and he just wants, maybe he just wants to go watch a movie or something like that. I don't really, I'll be like, I don't have the time. We're going to have to do that another weekend. But at the same time, it doesn't feel like work because it's stuff I'm really interested and quite passionate about. But yeah, I would say it's a challenge for me. And at the same time, I don't regret doing that. I've learned a lot through the process of being open to different things and meeting new people. So
I understand the challenge completely. I think it's for a lot of us in the community. There's so many interesting things, so many interesting people learning so much new things. Over the years, I've grown to become better at saying no. Saying no to other people. My challenge is, then I say no to somebody asks me something, I say no to, and then 5 minutes later I invent something else myself. And saying no to my own ideas is even harder than to ideas from other people.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's something you recognize, or.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's we do a lot of things, and I've seen you around at many different things. You are Yeah, I think you're still in the board of the Agile Alliance,
I
if I'm
am,
correct.
yes, still on the
So
board of the
that's
Agile Alliance, about to hit my second term, which starts in January. So been on the board for 3 years and starting the next term in January for another 3 years. This will be my final term coming up. So yeah.
so yeah, and that's definitely something that can take as much time as you want,
Yeah.
or as your partner doesn't want, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah,
But
like I said, though, it doesn't feel like work, right? So that stuff, it's, it's stuff I'm so passionate about, really working, on things that influence the Agile community. And, I really believe in the vision and mission behind the Agile line. So like I said, it doesn't feel like work. For my husband, it feels like work, but for me, it doesn't when I'm doing it. So yeah.
Mhm. Well, that kind of answers that second part of that question, which was what about it is good, is that what I'm
Mm.
hearing is that it doesn't feel like work to you. Is there something else why it's a good thing for you that you have that challenge?
I mean, I think it's just, continuously being challenged to maybe explore different things. So, if I use the Agile Alliance as an example, I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of different pieces of work. So I've got involved with the committees, with the initiative work that's being done. There was a really important piece of work that we did a couple of years ago on growing racial equity, and those are things I may not have been involved with if I hadn't of the alliance, and that spun off really, really great things. So within South Africa, we did work. Kind of stemming from all of the work that was done with growing racial equity, we started an initiative in South Africa around agile equity, right? How do we improve the number of speakers of color in the agile community within South Africa, within Africa, and expanding outside of that? So it triggered a lot of really great conversations. And I think all of that kind of stemmed back from not saying no to things, because I was interested and quite passionate about it. And then you dig a little bit deeper and, it starts becoming something that becomes really important in your life. So I think it is a good thing. Like I said, it doesn't feel like work. It feels like what I should be doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, I was about to say, you say it becomes a big thing in my life. I would say it becomes a big thing in the life for many different people. If I think, especially what you did in with the equity thing about helping other, I don't know if that's the thing that you're talking about, but I think you worked at some point helping people become better speakers
Yeah,
and
we,
doing all that kind of stuff. And so
yeah,
there
we
was
we
a lot of
got a
initiatives there.
Yeah, so there was
Um,
a group of us, and you've interviewed a couple of people that were part of that community. So Nono Crazy and Chris Radebi in South Africa. So the four of us really worked on that together. And we've just kicked off the new version. It needed to go through a little bit of a refresh, which we've now done. And we're actually partnering a little bit more with Agile in Color. So they've got an initiative that they're also driving around encouraging speakers of color, which is called Colorful Voices. And we've kind of shared a little bit of knowledge across us. So we're doing a little bit of a collaboration between us. And that's really what we're looking at kicking in the early part of the new year. So yeah.
That's with Anu. Is that what is that one of the
Uh,
people who's joined? I heard about some of these things, so that's
Yeah,
why I'm asking.
Anu Gopal, she's driving
Yeah.
the Africa agility work. So that's really
Mm,
targeting a number of young African females, typically
mm,
unemployed, and really putting them through a boot camp where they go through certification and learning, very focused around, I think it's more North and West Africa, but it's just incredible work that Anu's doing in Africa.
mm,
It is work I've also had the opportunity to get a little bit involved in, and that was more through the Emerging Economies Initiative that I'm part of. So in Anu's first year, we did provide some sponsorship towards that. So yeah, that's also, there's so many awesome things happening in Africa.
mm.
Yeah, a lot
We
of
can keep
exciting things.
talking about
Yeah,
all
we
of these
really
things.
could. We really could.
And actually that kind of brings me to that next question. You feel that passion, you feel that drive, but do you know where that drive is coming from? Is there something what you recognize where that is coming from,
I
that
mean,
drive?
I think something some people have told me in the past is that I'm very values driven. And if I look at
Mm,
my values, I think, I would tend to agree with them when they say that, right? So, I mean,
mm,
I do tend to be very, very focused on things like authenticity and tolerance and, kindness and, and I think this is all part of it, right? I mean, again, I come from South Africa. Most people know the history of the country. A lot of there's a lot of complexity there, right? Growing up as a
mm.
white person in South Africa, growing up as a person of color in South Africa, there's a lot of history that we bring. And I think a lot of that has encouraged me to kind of look outside of what is maybe for me. It's some of these conversations are hard. They're hard in South Africa, they're hard in other countries. I is I feel passionate about really achieving equity and ensuring that people are included in conversations. In South Africa, it was very focused on race. But now that I've moved to Europe, it's a little bit more focused on gender. It, I think, yeah, it's that inclusion. I think that is something that drives me a lot. And that could be something in my past as well, right? I mean, I was always on like a bit of a fringe society, not really mainstream. And I don't know if that's where the roots kind of formed. But yeah, it's definitely something that I would say that the work that I do outside of work, so the volunteer work that I do is typically centered around this kind of thing, really focusing on community, focusing on inclusion, letting people be themselves. So
And you're not afraid to go for the hard conversations, that because I remember when well, who is agile, it started out as a book, and in one of the versions there was a country version for South Africa that was, just to be blunt, way too wide when it came out, and I only realized it by having conversations with you, because I kind of, well, outsourced is the wrong word, but I would have had people helping out, and I didn't pay enough attention. And it was only after having a conversation with you that I realized, oh, we should really have work much harder to make it much more inclusive. And the current version of that book is, of that ebook is much better. And that's because of well, for me, it wasn't a hard conversation in the sense that it was, well, it was hard because I realized, oh, I fucked up, or that I didn't pay attention. But you're not afraid to challenge me or anyone else to say, look a little bit deeper, because you might be forgetting part of it. And I'm still grateful that you reached out and did that conversation. And I can imagine that that's not easy to do that with people that you don't know at that time. So that's
and honestly, credit goes to the group that really worked on updating the stories and reaching out to agilists in South Africa. So again, there was a core group of people. This also came out of the growing racial equity conversations that we had. So around the same time that we had the New African Voices conversation, there was a separate group that was really talking about how do we improve the feeling of inclusion within the agile community in South Africa. And somebody in that community said, if we don't see Black agilists, how do we know who to model? Like we're not seeing people that look like us in the book. And it was just such a profound statement. And that did lead to us reaching out to you. And then after that, there was a core group of people that then went and interviewed, reached out to people. And that's the new version of the book that you see. So like you said, really awesome that we've now, there's a focus on broadening the scope. And it's great to see that in South Africa in particular, that we are starting to see that diversity. I think years ago, definitely when I first entered the Agile community, there wasn't that much diversity. The community itself is really rallying together to make a difference there.
Yeah, and I think it shows, it shows in all kind of things. It shows in all conversations I have with people, both from South Africa, and also the fact that, well, kind of because you moved to the Netherlands, but actually a few others have moved to other countries as well, and are giving visibility in the rest of the world, and also for the people in South Africa or in Africa in general, about, hey, look, it's not just us in a little corner, but we can actually make a difference in the rest of the world.
Certainly.
both visually and both on the work that we do. So that's very nice. And
Mm.
that again brings me to that next question: that what do you consider your biggest achievement? Because now we talked about a lot of
Mm.
achievements. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you feel you want to brag about, or?
I don't want to brag about it, but something I'm really proud to have been a part of is, I mean, we've spoken about New African Voices. So I'm going to bring in something else that I've been a part of, which is the Emerging Economies Initiative. It is an Agile Alliance initiative. This is, maybe how I was first really introduced. Well, I've done volunteer work for the Agile Alliance before, but this was my first big piece of work I did with the Alliance. And really, the Emerging Economies Initiative was created to provide people in emerging economies with access to agile speakers, agile events at either no cost or very little cost. So, really taking the local economy into account, the local dynamics, and trying to arrange events around that. So, I kicked it off in South Africa. We did the pilot. Very quickly after that, we moved into Colombia. So I was working with Ricardo Abella. He's originally from Bogota in Colombia, now living in Washington. And we kind of refined the concept using South Africa and Colombia as a base. And since then, it's grown a little bit more. Part of what you were speaking about, that the Africa Agility in Nigeria, that was something that we funded. Ricardo's recently been to Costa Rica to do something with the university there as well. And we've spoken to a lot of people that originally wanted an event to be an emerging economies event, and it's got bigger than that. And it's become something that they've actually been able to set up in their country. But our key focus was always on people that couldn't necessarily afford to get Agile training or go to an Agile conference. And we are, COVID kind of put a little bit of a pause on that for a bit, but it is something I'm really proud to be associated with that. Like we're targeting, students that are on government bursaries at, not your top tier universities, your kind of local universities. And this is a way for them to learn about Agile and work out can they actually apply it in their lives. And, the feedback that we get after these events is always great. So again, it's a way of spreading Agile values and principles, to people that cannot afford to attend conferences and training. So yeah, that work I'm hoping is just going to keep getting bigger and more. At the moment, we focus on emerging economies, but we don't, if it's a frontier economy as well, we don't say no, right? If someone comes to us and they're, it kind of fits within the scope of the countries we're looking at, we do jump in and help. So, and that's something that Ricardo is currently doing a lot of work on. So yeah, I would say it's something I'm very proud of.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I've heard about. Well, when I was looking at the Agile Alliance a year or two ago, really more into what are the recent things that they have been doing during the pandemic. That was one of the things that I watched and that I looked. I wasn't involved, but I heard many people talk about it because it made an impact for
Yeah.
many things. So that's really where I see. Well, for me, the Agile Alliance can make a difference there. In
Yeah.
okay, because in all the other, well, in all the other countries, in a lot of other countries there is money, and then people might be going to agile courses, but here it's really like, okay, what can we invest in other countries and bring the value? And what we see, and I think this is a little bit, or at least what I see, is that there is actually a lot of value. The people might be learning, and they might be right out of there might be people from other countries that we wouldn't consider agile, but actually, because they have been growing in these economies that don't have that much money, they are so much more resourceful in
Got to be
having
really
ideas.
creative, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so there is I actually think this is for me the future of agile, in the sense that these people have a lot of more ideas, and sometimes, let's face it, if you're privileged, you don't always realize what exists out there, and you might be, yeah, just take things for granted, where people who are in different kind of circumstances living are much more resourceful for solving problems. And so yeah, that's and we don't always, I would say, we and Western society doesn't always look at these countries for solving problems.
Yeah.
If you look at how the pandemic, for example, it's always about the West is doing this and that, and then it's like, yeah, but wait a minute, there have been pandemics in Africa for a couple of decades now, and they've been contained better than what happened in Europe, for example, in the beginning of the pandemic, because we didn't want to change our lives. And actually, in Africa, it spread slower because of some of the things than how people reacted to it. So there is definitely a lot that we can learn from these countries. So in that
Definitely.
sense, I really like how what these initiatives bring, and tells people, look, there is value in these people, and let's learn from them. Because I don't believe in the charity part of, okay, we'll give them money and then people become. No, it's actually it's both ways. We should learn from what's happening in these countries.
Yeah, and I think a key thing that's made the Emerging Economies Initiative really work is we work with people in the country. So we don't want to come in and run an event that's our event. We really
Exactly.
try understand what is needed here. How is it different to other events? So, an example is when we did our first event in Colombia, and again, I was quite naive coming into it. I'd only done the pilot in South Africa, but it was really key for us to get a Spanish speaker to do the session, because we were really targeted straight out of school, people that were unemployed, women as right. So again, in Colombia, no women are in tech, so this was also an opportunity to reach unemployed women, and we needed a Spanish speaker. So these are things where that local consideration is really important. So we work with people in the countries to get the event set up. It's not us coming in and saying, we're going to run this event, we're going to tell you how it's going to be. We give a whole bunch of ideas on things that we have seen work in a whole bunch of different countries, and then we help them with the logistics that they've got to think about. And obviously, there's also a bit of funding that we provide to try and make it as free as possible for the people that attend. In some countries, it is 100% free. In others, it's absolutely minimal. It is something most people within that bracket that could actually afford. So it's quite important that we involve the local community so that it isn't seen as, like you said, like charity, right? This is really around empowering the local community and working with them on what works.
Yeah, you said it so much better. That's exactly what I wanted to say. That's how it felt to me when I read about these things. It's really like, let's we bring in some ideas, and of course we bring in some experience, but it's not just us running the show, like you say. It's not the Agile Alliance that runs the show. No, it's a local thing, and the Agile Alliance is there to help them and to see it and listen to the people and see, oh, okay, you need Spanish speaking, okay, because we didn't think. Because that's indeed, depending on what countries. I mean, in Africa, I think I would think it's fair to say that English is much better language as understood as in some other languages.
In some countries,
I've learned that with Who's Agile, that a lot of children, in depending on what countries from Africa, they actually are taught in English because of historical reasons, and so there is actually English is pretty well spoken in many of these countries, and that's not the case in every country around the world, of course, and so that's definitely something to learn and to listen to the people locally to see what is needed there. That's definitely very nice of that initiative. Okay, let's move to that next question. And this is one that I've know that you've done some workshops around agility and everything. So if there was one thing you wanted to talk about, what's the personal agility tip that you want to share with people?
I feel like I shared a tip of what not to do, which is where I was saying I have way too much work in progress. So limiting your work in progress is probably a really good tip. I don't follow it, but I used to work with someone called Beers, and he always used to say, like, do as I say, not do as I do. So limit your work in progress is a really good personal agility tip. I think certainly a tip that I think has helped me in the past, and maybe it's not really around personal agility, but it is really around just getting curious, right? Just getting curious, stay curious around why things are happening in the way that they are, and just really enter it with that beginner's mindset. I think so often we jump to conclusions about something that's happening, and just really going in and being curious and asking questions and just really seeing what is in front of you without being tainted by other things that you do. I mean, that's it's advice I live by every day. I try to live by that every day. So,
And you do that, I think, with a lot of empathy, yeah, because I've seen
mm,
you in action in workshops and other things. I think, that when you do ask these questions about why is something happening, you definitely don't judge the people when you ask these questions. It's more like you say, it's the curiosity, and it's with the empathy for, okay, there is definitely a reason why people are doing it.
yeah.
It might still be wrong to do it, but there is a reason behind why
Mm,
people are doing it. And what I feel is that the more empathy you put into these questions, the better you get your answer, and the better you can help the people and are interested in then in listening and going the next step.
yeah.
Is that a correct statement?
Oh, yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
Because that's indeed, and it's interesting how it goes back again to you limit what you're doing or not limit what you do because you have that curiosity. That's the part. Yeah, I
Yes.
want to jump a little bit to that part where you say, well, don't do as I do as I say. um because when you talked about doing a lot of stuff, you talked mostly about community work. How is
Mm.
that, for example, at work? Are you better at limiting things in progress there, or how
I
should I
hope
see it?
I'm a bit better. I think I'm a bit better. We actually had this conversation last week with my team where we were going through our strategy for the coming year, and I did say the same thing. You know, we had just Bob Galen had given us a talk on his book, and one of the key things that he talks about is limiting work in progress. And I was like, oh,
Mhm.
you know, this is, you know, again, it's probably something I really need to focus on. I think I'm a bit to work for, especially for the team. I try to limit how many working on at any point in time. Again, I tend to have a few things open that I could probably prioritize a bit better. Like I said, as an agile coach, it's probably not ideal for me to admit that, but you know, it's certainly it's something that's easier to do with work than it is with personal stuff that I'm passionate about, though. You know, prioritization with work stuff, it's hard to prioritize passion
Well,
initiatives. So
it's interesting that you say it's maybe not good as an agile coach. I think it's at the same time it's maybe even more powerful because I've seen agile coaches saying, okay, you have to do it and it's normal and it's like, yeah, but real life sometimes get in the way, and I think admitting the hard part might also show people the vulnerability and show like, yes, having a priority is hard, and it's hard for most people. Maybe there's a few people who can do that really well, but I think for most people it's really hard.
yeah,
And still it needs to be done because you cannot do three things at the same time. Well, maybe you can, but I can't. I definitely, for this
yeah,
interview, I have to focus here and I cannot pay
yeah.
attention to whatever's happening there or there. It's like, no, this is my
Mm,
focus. um and yeah, that is what needs to happen. Even though I might be in my mind like, okay, after this conversation I might need to do this and that,
mm,
like, okay, let's ignore it. I Before we started, I wrote down a few things on a piece of on a post-it, like, okay, after this conversation I need to check, I need to
mm,
order groceries for next week, so
yeah.
that's definitely something I need to do tonight. But I'm not going to do it while I'm talking to you. I just need it.
and and certainly, you know, just with that in mind, I'm in my husband's office at the moment. In my office, which is a little bit smaller, which is why I'm in his bigger one, I've got a Kanban board, right? So I have got my board and I track. So while I may have a lot of things open, I visualize where I am with everything. Again, I think it also helps me get that movement of things and it starts warning me when there's too much on the go. And I do put my personal stuff in there too. So if there's things I've got to do for the family and the house, it goes in there too. So
So you have one list for all the work. Ah, that's interesting because
yeah.
I've grown over. It depends a little bit. If it's a list I share with my family, we might split it up. But if it's indeed the things I need to do, I prefer to have one list because otherwise you have a list there and a list there, and then I need a
Yeah.
list of lists, and then it doesn't work anymore.
You know what, work stuff and home stuff, it's just as important, right? So if you have different lists for like home related things and work related things, it feels like they're completely different, but you're just one person. So I find it important that if there's things I have to do, they need to go on the same list so that I do prioritize stuff that happens in the house along with my work stuff so that I have that balance. So yeah.
And you use the word balance. I like to use the word fusion because, like you say, we're just one person. There is, we can think about different, and of course, we might have a different persona at work than at home. But still, it's one person, and I cannot be until now. I cannot be at two places in the same time. So I have to focus. And okay, if I want to do something together, well, like I already brought my children to conferences, then I can do something together. But that is a fusion. That is doing with something with a family member that is work related or community related, but it's still just doing one thing at the same time. It's that's the kind of thing. So I like that you put it back to one backlog. It really helps indeed. Let's move to the remote working because you moved from one country to another, and if you just did it, that also means it's kind of during the pandemic that you moved, and
I
so
did. I
so that
actually I worked for a month and a half in South Africa for a Dutch company because
wow.
of paperwork. So there were some issues with paperwork. Emerging economies, we have different challenges. So it took a little bit longer than was anticipated. So I worked 100% remotely for a month and a half before we moved across. Maybe the things I've learned about remote working, I am quite an introvert. I love my space. I enjoy time on my own and with my family. And what I've maybe learned about remote working is I actually also don't mind going into the office. So we do go in a couple of times a week. It's reasonably flexible. And I actually was surprised at how much I enjoy going in. I thought, being an introvert and getting so used to working from home during the pandemic, I was like, oh, I don't want to go back into an office again. But it's not been bad, right? So I think we found a way that when we are working remotely, we are doing it well. And we're starting to explore a little bit more what does more hybrid look like, which is a little bit messier again. I think when everybody was working from home completely, it was easier. And now we're starting to realize there's some sessions that do have people joining remotely because they're in other parts of Europe. They live there. And, then we've got people, in the Netherlands that are there in person. And how do we sort of figure it out? But yeah, I realized going back in person is not as terrible as I thought it was going to be either. So.
And so you talked a little bit about that hybrid. Is there a tip about hybrid work? Is there something that people need to do when you work hybrid? Because that's a new world for most of us, right?
So we did something last week in my team. We had some people virtually, some people in person. I certainly learned a lot from that experience. I would say if it has to be a hybrid, because sometimes it's just, either you're excluding people because they're not there in person. So what the approach that we took is we did say, think digital first. All of the exercises that we did in our workshop, they were all done in a virtual collaboration tool. We used Miro, so we could have done in person, but what we did is people within, that were there physically, they grouped up, they had their laptops, they did stuff online, and so did the people that were virtually. They were in a separate, went into a breakout room, they did the same thing. We're experimenting with some things to see what works. Certainly don't try to do massive big exercises with a lot of people where it's physical and virtual, breaking things down a little bit smaller into smaller groups. And again, I think we're learning as we're going. So we're experimenting with some hybrid approaches and really just sharing them across the teams. So seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and sort of building on all of the experiments that each other's doing. So
Yeah, and I was thinking also about, because you've worked for the Agile Alliance during the pandemic as well.
yeah,
So I assume that also, I know that the Agile Alliance, the board meetings, usually they try to have it as much physically as possible, but of course that
yeah.
was not possible the last 2 years. So that's basically a completely virtual team, almost never working together except for some board meetings.
Mm.
Is there anything you learned from that experience that you can share? Because I don't know how much you can share from that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same as what most teams had when, they were thrust into the pandemic. I think the biggest challenge that we had was working across a lot of time zones. So usually when you're working in a team, you try limit it to 2 time zones. But I mean, we've got people in Singapore, in Australia, in, a European time zone, Eastern time. We've got people in India. That's a lot of time zones to
Mm-hmm.
accommodate. And I think the biggest thing we learned was just really to be flexible. So there were a couple of sessions that I would do in the middle of the night, but there's at the moment we've kind of settled on a time where some people in the US get up really, really early, like 5:30, 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday. It's Central European time. I'm good. It's the middle of the afternoon. I've probably got the best time zone. Other people are up till really late, right? Like they're getting into bed at 2:00 in the morning. So it's it's harder because we don't get to choose our team. Well, we do, I suppose, in a way, but we also can't say, well, it's limited to 2 time zones. That our board members are spread around the world. So that, being accommodating, understanding that sometimes you're going to be the one getting to bed late and other times you're going to be the one getting up early. That's, and again, I think we probably could stagger it a little bit more, but usually we kind of find a pattern that sort of works for us. And then, this year when we have our new board members joining, we'll have to reach out again and see what does the new time zone slots look like. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of why I asked, because I kind of knew who was in that old board. I don't know who's in the new board, but definitely I had an idea about the time zones, and I've interviewed some of them, and indeed it's around the world. So that was what's interesting me about that's the challenging part, and it's like you say, you cannot just move. Well, you did move, but you didn't move much time zones. I think it's about the same time zone.
About the same, yeah.
Yeah, it's I think it's a 1 hour difference with Johannesburg or something like that. Like that. So that's not much. So you moved really up and not really time zones wise. So that didn't help for the Agile Alliance meetings. Let's put it like this. That's but thank you for sharing, because it's indeed sometimes people don't always realize that. Well, there is something like the Agile Alliance that it has a board, it has people from, and I think the Agile Alliance has done a tremendous amount of work to make it much more diverse, also country-wise. So making sure, because it used to be a lot of people from the US, so now it's people from all around the world. I think there's a lot more diversity, but that brings its own challenges, of course, and that the challenges are for the people who are in there. So that makes it a lot harder. But at the same time, I think the value is also there because of that diversity, because of you realize how hard all these things are. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, diversity is actually, especially like the geographic diversity, gender diversity, it's been a big focus of the Agile Alliance. Over the past couple of years, we fundamentally shifted the way that we do the board interviews. I think a couple of years ago, we also realized we weren't getting as diverse candidates as we could. So again, we actually went through an exercise around trying to understand, why aren't we getting diverse candidates, right? So what often happens is people remove themselves from the process before they even apply. So it actually also helped us understand a little bit more about what do we need to do different as a board to encourage more diverse applications. So every year we're tweaking the process, but certainly we've made quite a number of significant changes over the past 3 years. And yeah, I think we're starting to get to a process that we think, that we think is a good foundation to just kind of keep building on. But certainly the diversity of the board, I think, is reflected, or at least the process has, demonstrated that it's working. Our board is probably the most diverse it's been in quite a number of years. So yeah.
I agree. I think at some point there were, multiple kind of diversity, and so it's
Yeah.
a lot better that these days. So yeah, and well, I don't know how much part of you are in that, but then definitely the result is there. So I think the Agile Alliance, a big kudos for the work that they're doing. And like any kind of organization, there still needs to be improvement. So many other levels, but that's definitely something where I think everybody could see the results there.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's move to that next question. What's a book that you have read that you want to talk about?
So I decided to talk about a book that I am reading. Like I said, I always have a lot of open things, and I read a couple of books at once. So I find that I often get inspiration to read a particular book based on something that is happening in my life at that moment. And then sometimes I put it to one side and I come back to it and I finish it a bit later. So one of the books that I'm reading at the moment is Lead Without Blame by Diana Larson and Trisha Broderick. So this, I haven't finished it yet, but this has been really, really well timed for me. I changed roles a while ago, working with a new team, and this really kind of helped me refocus on building resilient learning teams. And I've just found it's been exactly what I really needed. So I'm looking forward to reading through the rest of it. I've enjoyed the first part. I'm currently, I've just finished the part around really this kind of co-creating intelligence with teams. So if you have a look at like Daniel's Purpose Mastery or Purpose Autonomy and Mastery, and they've kind of tweaked the mastery part into really this co-intelligence with teams. And yeah, it's been something that I've certainly wanted to start really using that thinking in the team that I'm working with currently. So yeah, it's been awesome so far.
Yeah, I've interviewed both ladies. I haven't. I have to admit. I'm sorry, Tricia. Sorry, and I still haven't read the book. It's on my plate, partially because of all the interviews that I read a lot less these days. But I think this is the number one book that has been promoted in my network the last couple of weeks, months. I would say
Definitely.
Everybody's
Highly
talking about
recommended.
it.
Yeah,
Everybody's talking about it. At least everybody that has read it, even just flip to the pages, they all say the same thing. It's also the result of remote work, which is also interesting because for the first time, Diana, when you know how she's writing a book, is usually sitting with people together and writing it together, and now she had to relearn that and do that remotely. And she talked about it on her interview about how she loved that, doing that with Tricia. Same thing for Tricia when I interviewed them, because it was new for both of them in that kind of way, but it resulted. And it comes back also to what you talked about in the beginning, that first work relationship that you had. Your manager was definitely not leading without blame. He was actually blaming you or your 17-year-old about basically something you could have known, you could not have known. And so that, is there something that did reading this book triggered that thinking about that experience, or how should I see it?
It maybe did, right? Because I mean, I don't know why I used that experience in the interview, right? But certainly going through the book has, again, I find that the world gives me signals to read certain things when I need to see them. I don't know. I obviously send out signals and it tells me what I need. And this is definitely, this was the book that I needed to start. So yeah, it probably did trigger that story, right? Around, being that kind of leader, right? And just reconnecting back with that. Something that I loved that Trisha and Diana did as well is they had a sensitivity editor. So somebody who actually went through to really kind of check the words that were used, and were they sensitive? Were they inclusive? And for me, it's shown in the book, right? Like I really appreciated that as well. And yeah, it's like I said, I think it's a timiest book for me. I haven't finished it, but I will. I'm hoping December is the month I finish this book. So
Okay, so that probably means by the time this is aired, would I put this live that you have read the book fully, so you can add people things in the comment, because I don't know yet when this will go live, but
That's
I've recorded. I think actually the interview with Tricia is not live yet, so it's one
okay.
of the things that will go live in a couple of weeks. I'm not sure. Yeah, I've interviewed too many people this year to know which ones. But definitely the one from Diana is already live.
Yes.
And it's like you say, there is so much value in there. So many people find different kind of things. I'm really glad that you brought indeed up that the fact that they have someone looking for these
Yep.
words. Okay, how that because I think this is sometimes some things that people don't always realize how much value there is in using the right languages. I've been to a few conversations the last weeks about, okay, should we say man, women, and things like that? Yeah, but you can just talk about people, and then it's a word that nobody feels offended with, and it still is clear. And so
Yeah.
sometimes it's that little things, and of course, in a lot of cases, it's a lot harder. So I'm just using a very cheap example here, but having someone taking care of that makes it much more inclusive, makes it much more nicer for people to read
Yeah.
it. And
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes people who are not used, and I think most of us were not used to using that kind of language, but once we get attention to it, we get much better use. And yeah, it feels much more natural. I think we need to look much more for that kind of things, and I'm yeah, starting to get more sensitive to these to wording, but it's hard because we're so much ingrained into a world
I
that
make
doesn't
mistakes
care.
all the time still, and then I overthink it. And yeah, that's why I really appreciated that they took the effort to do it with the book, right? I think
Mhm.
again, I think I still have so much to learn, and it's great to see that authors have actually taken the time to do that. So really, yeah, really impressed.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you for bringing that up. It's important that they get acknowledgement
Yeah, the
for that
acknowledgement
work
for it.
and the
Yeah,
investment for doing that.
yeah.
Okay, let's move to, for me, one of the most interesting questions. What's a question that I haven't asked and that you think I should also ask you?
So maybe a question would be like, what's the one thing you wish you'd learned earlier in your
Hmm.
agile career? Like that I think is always a really interesting question. I know what the answer for me would be. I was lucky a couple of years ago to start on my ORSC journey as an ORSC coach, and I got certified a
Hmm.
couple of years ago. I wish that I'd done that a few years before then. So I wish that I'd got a little bit more immersed in the professional side of coaching, really understood what professional coaching is and maybe how it's a bit different to agile coaching as we understand it. So yeah, that would be my answer to that question. What do I wish I'd learned earlier? Really what the difference was between teaching, mentoring, coaching, consulting,
And, and and
advising.
and what set you on the path of doing that? Because I know a few people who are certified in that, but I think I see a lot of differences how people move there. So what triggered you to do that? Do you know?
So somebody that I was working with in South Africa, Antoinette Kutsia, she had done the course and she recommended that I explore it and maybe I'd be interested. And I knew I never wanted to be a one-on-one coach, if that makes sense. I never wanted to be a life coach. It's just not something that I was comfortable with.
Hmm.
And this sounded pretty interesting. And I attended a foundations session that was set up by a local user group in South Africa, Sugsa. And that kind of triggered it. So I went to an introduction, and then after that, I did the fundamentals, and I quite liked it. I liked the whole idea of really coaching the third entity or coaching the space between people. And I went on the next course and did an advanced. And then, after I completed the advanced, I realized how edgy coaching was for me. And
Mm.
it was a huge question as to, do I want to actually go through the process of getting certified? It was a huge edge. I was really nervous about it. And I decided again, it was something I was curious to see how far I could take it and if I would be able to practically apply it. And I then did the certification. And I must say the foundations and the advanced courses were excellent. But the real learning for me was in the certification cohort. So actually going through the certification with a number of other people. It was just I would say it was a life-defining experience. When I say that to people, their
Wow.
eyes were really big, but it was, right? I learned so much, and it was very uncomfortable for me. And when you're in that edgy space, that's where you learn the most. And I learned a lot. And it's something I don't regret doing. I'm so grateful that I actually had the opportunity to experience that. And I use stuff out of OSC all the time. And again, I mean, I chose all. There's so many different areas of coaching people could learn a little bit more about, but it's something that really, really helped me as an agile coach. I like I said, it's the one thing I wish I could have learned earlier. But I also think you need to have a little bit of experience as well. And maybe that's what made it so powerful, is that I had a little bit of experience of what not to do in agile coaching before I really started exploring that as a field. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I've done some completely different kind of training. So I haven't followed it. It's on my list on maybe one day, and probably I'll regret not doing it earlier, a little bit like you had. But I've done some therapy kind of training, not become a therapist, but to understand it a little bit, because like 20 years ago, these kind of training I didn't know. Maybe it existed, but I didn't know. But I do remember one of the first sessions there were people that basically 20 years ago were my age now, so 20 years older. And I do remember looking at them and saying, wow, there's so much wisdom in these people, because indeed they didn't follow that training earlier on, but they had so much life experiences, and that made them grasp some of the things that the teachers were saying much faster. And I realized at the time, so there's value, because I've learned so much earlier on, and they were looking at me, wow, you do this at a young age, because I was 24, 25, something like that, which is really young for doing these kind of trainings. But at the same time, I was looking at them like, you bring all this experience. So I think there is value in both sides. And we need to look at these experiences. So thanks for sharing, because I think there's a lot of people. Well, I haven't counted that. Maybe I should count as well. But there's actually quite a lot of people who've been on the show who have been trained, who are in the middle of the process of learning it. And I think almost everybody has the same reaction, like it's life changing. And if you compare that to agile certification, it's definitely a completely different level.
Yeah,
it's really about the certification is really the life-changing part, where in the agile space it's much more a piece of paper, depending again on what kind of certification, of course, but it's not a 2-day Scrum certification.
Yeah,
Let's put it
listen, I
like
mean,
that.
the OSC certification cohort, just kind of going through the whole process, because it's 8 months in total, and really kind of building on the exercises, really getting to experience such a different approach to coaching, different people. Yeah, it's something I highly recommend.
Great, fantastic. So I'll put links to the show notes to the different kind of things that you have been doing. Okay, I want to move to one of the last parts, but one that I look very forward to your answers is that who do you think I should ask next? Because I know you have a small, well, I don't know how small it, but you have a list of people, and I was kind of expecting a list. So who would you want me to talk to?
So luckily, you've already got a number of people that were on my list. So especially some of the amazing South Africans like Nono Crazy. I think you also spoke to Oz, and Bevan. So you've already got a lot of really awesome South Africans. The one South African that I don't think you have on your list is Shadi Taylor. So she has relocated to New Zealand. She is working very much in the product management space. I used to work with her a couple of years ago, and really she's just a powerhouse of agile product management. So really, really awesome person to explore.
If I'm not
that
mistaken,
with.
that's her. Huh?
Yes, that's
her.
her. Yeah, you've even got the hair color. She's currently got purple hair. So
It's it's yeah. I just found it on the internet,
yes,
picture of her, but that's indeed
that's it.
yeah.
And
It's a nice one, and indeed, it's someone who has not even been invited. So I think she will be. I hope she will be delighted
I
to
hope
be
so.
invited. But yeah,
And
it's a good thing. Yeah.
And the other person that definitely should be invited is Ricardo Abella. So he is my co-chair on the Emerging Economies Initiative. I've now worked with Ricardo for a couple of years, and the work that he is doing in South America in emerging economies is just really mind-blowing. So much respect
That's Ricardo,
for
huh?
him. That is Ricardo. So definitely he would be great to have as well. Just got such great perspectives. So yeah. And then I see you've got pictures of Nono and Bevan there, who I've mentioned.
Yeah.
And then there's
So
two
that's
people.
Nono and that's Bevan, but
Yes.
indeed I have already talked to. And then two people, yeah. Who wants to talk next?
Another two people from the Agile Alliance board. So Ellen Grove, I've worked with Ellen. I've been with her the past 3 years on the board. She was our interim managing director for a period of time. That is Ellen. Definitely just someone I really respect and admire in the Agile space. I've been so fortunate to work with her for the past 3 years. So really would be really great to have on the show as well. Like I said, she's
and a wonderful person. Yeah,
just
it's
incredible, right? Yeah.
So this is a picture from her in Agile India when with my daughter. That it was a wonderful experience for my daughter speaking at the Agile conference, but it was also wonderful because of people like Ellen, who really just, well, I don't know how to say it, but that she really took the time also to talk with her and to consider her as a normal speaker, and which it was in a sense, but it was really like, okay, making sure, okay, so now you need to be your part of the Agile Alliance, your membership, and all these kind of things. So she's really treating everybody as a normal person and with respect and all kind of things. So that was, yeah, that's Ellen.
That's Ellen. And then the other person from the Agile Alliance board is Apeksha Patel. So I've now worked with her for 2 years on the board. She's a CSP. She operates out of India. Again, just that's her. That's a picture. And I'm currently where we are looking into the initiatives and really working out, kind of how to move that work forward after the pandemic. And again, I've learned so much from her in the past 2 years. So definitely someone that I think would be quite interesting. She does pretty cool stuff in India. And yeah, definitely an interesting person to have and to interview.
Well, and like you said, you talked about the experience that you bring from Africa, but indeed, India is again another continent, is again another completely different kind of culture, which is interesting just to be there. For me, the big Agile conference in India is completely different than in America, and there is different kind of challenges that are there, and so there's a lot of, again, investment in that culture that the Agile Alliance does to make sure that people are helped with the local community again. So that's a lot of the nice things there. So thank you very much for your time. It's been wonderful. If people want to connect to you, what is a good way to reach out to you?
Probably via LinkedIn would be the easiest. There you go. My LinkedIn page. That's the one.
I think these days that's one of the better ways to connect with people. So well, it's been wonderful. We were a little bit in the beginning scared about connection issues. I'm not 100% sure about the quality, because indeed, like I said, sometimes it looked a little bit strange, but in many of the recordings that usually ended up being recorded really well. But it's been a wonderful conversation. Like I was hoping and kind of expecting to. So it was nice to learn about you and the different kind of paths that you took in your life, and how that brought you to where you are now. So thank you for that time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching Who's Agile, where the stories of Agilists come to life. I hope you liked today's interview. Subscribe if you're not subscribed and want to get to know other Agilists.